Hello, everyone. My name is Chris. I'm the Director of Korea for the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. And today I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk to you about relatively recent but still very important development for Hong Kong. And that is, of course, its growing and very diverse startup ecosystem. Now, everybody would know Hong Kong is an international financial center, a very important business hub. But in fact, over the last few years, Hong Kong's startup ecosystem has been growing leaps and bounds. And this is very interesting development, we feel, for the Korean economy, because, of course, Hong Kong and Korea has very strong trading relationships over the years. But we feel that in the area of startups and the larger picture of sort of connecting the two startup ecosystems in Hong Kong and Korea, there is tremendous room, tremendous potential for our trade and for our bilateral economic relations to grow even stronger. Now, before I dive into what makes the ecosystem ticks and what support is there available for Korean companies, etc., I just like to quickly dive into some sort of recent developments and statistics about the ecosystem just to set the scene for you. Now, as of last year, we have 3,360 startups employing more than 10,000 employees in Hong Kong. And a quarter of those startup founders are actually coming from outside of Hong Kong, which sort of harks back to Hong Kong as the place where the world comes to do business. And of course, we've already had 9 unicorns, and I'm sure there'll be more to come later on. But just diving a little bit more into those statistics there, if you look at the bottom of the screen there, you will notice that we have very strong growth in terms of the number of startups over the last few years, double-digit growth in 2017, 18, and 19. The growth rate obviously slowed in 2020 because of COVID, but nevertheless, we still record a 6% growth. And post-COVID, we are confident that the sort of strong growth trend will continue. Now, the number of employees also grew very significantly over the previous years. Again, COVID had put a dent in that, but we feel there's a temporary reversal of the trend. In the long term, we're confident that the community will continue to grow, and not just because of people from Hong Kong, but of course, as we mentioned earlier, people coming from outside of Hong Kong. And that is, as you can see from the last sort of chart out there, that sort of represents why the ecosystem is still growing significantly in terms of the number, not just in terms of number of startups, but also in terms of the ecosystem enablers. So we're talking people like co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators. That sort of ecosystem facilitating community is growing quite rapidly, and I'm sure that will attract even more startups both locally and from around the world. Now, we mentioned that a quarter of the founders are from outside of Hong Kong, and some of those, the larger representative countries or economies are listed on the screen there. As you can see, they are a very diverse collection of sort of economies, whether it's from Europe or North America through to Asia, and we hope that within the next few years we would be able to see Korea's name and flag up on that screen as well. Now, just a quick talk about the sectors involved. Now, as you can see on the screen there, the highest represented sectors would be financial technology, e-commerce, logistics, professional services, IT consultancies, etc. So very much representative of Hong Kong as an economy. Those are, of course, the sectors that are responsible for the largest proportion of our GDP. But as the chart shows, there is actually a very wide ranging of sectors that the startups are covering. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'd like just to point out a couple of things there. Firstly, if you look at the bottom left corner of the slide, you'll see that there is 148 startups from the health and medical space. And if you look at on the right side, we combine that with the 55 from the biotech space, that's actually just over 200. That's actually, that whole space is continuing to grow in Hong Kong, and not just because of COVID, which obviously has a very big impact, but because the global investment opportunity is increasingly interested in that, and because that the Hong Kong Exchange has relaxed regulations or rules for pre-revenue companies to apply for listing. So there is, a trend that we foresee that more and more startups from that space will be coming to Hong Kong. So that's a space to watch out for. Another space to watch out for would be at the bottom right there, which is digital entertainment and gaming. Of course, this even pre-COVID, this was a growing space, and COVID obviously has accelerated the trend. And just above that as well, both smart city and sustainable green technology, those are also areas that were growing before COVID. And of course, after the pandemic, these will become more and more important. And I pointed out these few areas specifically because I feel that, those are areas that Korea are very strong, and we feel that that could be very interesting if we collaborate more in those areas. Now, I think that's enough talk about the ecosystem sort of statistics and performances so far. So let me dive into why Hong Kong has become a very fast-growing and sort of diverse ecosystem. Now, we all know Hong Kong as an international financial center. It has very deep and liquid pool of capital, an investment community that is very interested in startups and other venture investment opportunities. In fact, just yesterday or last night, depending on where you are, the IMF has reasserted that Hong Kong, in fact, remains one of the leading international financial centers in the world. So that doesn't change. But apart from that, Hong Kong is also a very vibrant business hub. It's a very easy to do business there. In fact, it was ranked as the world's freest economy for 25 successive years. It has very pro-business environment in terms of policies and regulations, a very simple and low tax regime, very effective and business-friendly legal system in terms of, excuse me, in terms of applying the rule of law. It also has world-class infrastructure, not just in terms of information technology, but also in terms of logistics and transportation. In fact, Hong Kong it can reach half the world's population within a 5-hour flight. And of course, it has a very productive workforce, a well-educated, highly professional workforce. And on top of that, Hong Kong is also represented by its freedom of movement for people, for talent, for capital, and of course, for access to information. Hong Kong is also a very dynamic startup destination because it has a very strong ecosystem. We mentioned earlier, there is a strong network of incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, etc. Because of its status as an international financial center, there's also a very deep pool of very experienced investors, whether they are for the earliest stages startups like angel investors, or even venture capitalists through to those from the later stages startups. Of course, there is policy support from the government as well to work into that. So Hong Kong is a great place for startups to look for fundraising opportunities. And of course, with fundraising opportunities, sometimes it goes beyond just financing. It also involves market penetration as well. And we'll come back to that in a few slides. We have a very welcoming community of startups. Of course, we have a very strong business community, a very international business community with lots of expats. So overseas startups coming to Hong Kong is not a new thing. In fact, it's been happening for quite some years now. And we mentioned we have 9 unicorns already, and we're very confident that they will continue to grow. Some of the names are logos at the bottom of the screen there, and they cover a variety of sectors, much like the startup ecosystem on itself. Now, there is also, I mentioned earlier, Hong Kong's location makes it very accessible to half the world's population. Apart from that, we also want to talk about Hong Kong's location in relation to China. Of course, Hong Kong is a gateway for entry into China. We have the most beneficial sort of economic and trade agreements or arrangements with the Chinese market. But recently, there's been a new development, and this is particularly exciting for the whole startup ecosystem, and that is, of course, the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. A cluster of 11 cities, all of them are shown on the map on screen there, that represent about 5% of China's total population, but accounting for around 12% of its GDP. And what that means is that we are looking at an area very well connected in terms of transportation, logistics, and of course in terms of ICT, in terms of wireless connectivity. An area of around 86 million people, highly affluent, high levels of disposable income that are very ready to welcome new products, new services, and of course new technology. So this Bay Area, as they say, could or will become one of the leading Bay Area companies in the world. In fact, its ambition is to become the biggest Bay Area economy in the world in the not too distant future. Now, just to highlight a few examples of how this GBA, short for Greater Bay Area, the sort of synergy we are looking at. Of course, Hong Kong and Shenzhen are two of the major cities that within this concept, both in terms of financing capability, services capability, and of course in terms of technology and R&D. And leveraging that, both the capabilities of Hong Kong and Shenzhen, there's been a lot of joint developments in terms of facilitating innovation to access the global market, in terms of sharing resources, sharing talent, sharing sort of knowledge, R&D, etc. And of course, there is a complementary governmental policies or regulations that focus on sort of joint promotion or joint collaboration between the two ecosystems there. And one example is the Lok Ma Chau Loop Innovation and Technology Park. It's a large business park with 1.2 million square meters. It's focused on procuring the latest technology and enhancing scientific research. And the particular focus for this particular park is, you can see, robotics, biomed, smart city, and fintech. So pretty much consistent of what we mentioned earlier in terms of ecosystem. And this by no means is the only, excuse me, only development now, and of course there will be more to come in the future. And finally, I think and we already mentioned Hong Kong as an international financial center, but I'd be remiss if I don't also mention that Hong Kong is already a global fintech hub. There's a lot of reasons for that. Of course, being an international financial center, we have 70 of the largest 100 banks in the world, not to mention a host of other leading financial institutions from all the subsectors in finance, fund management, private equity, insurance, etc., etc., etc. We already have more than 600 fintech companies in Hong Kong. Again, not just indigenous or locally found companies, but companies from around the world. And interestingly, we already have 8 virtual banks and 4 virtual insurers, as well as 1 virtual asset trading platform. And these are all licensed by the Hong Kong regulators. A lot of the indexes has also indicated that there's tremendous venture capital investment happening in Hong Kong for the fintech world. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One, of course, Hong Kong has a deep pool of investment capital, which we mentioned earlier. And again, with the access to China market and also by extent access to the Asian markets and basically the world market, Hong Kong is a great place for fintech startup to showcase its solutions. Of course, Hong Kong's population means it may not be the final destination market, but with that massive amount of financial institutions as well as corporates in the city, it's a great place to let people know what you're doing. And another thing I just wanted to quickly point out is that the regulators in Hong Kong, all 3 of them, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Securities and Futures Commission, as well as the Insurance Authority, are all working with the startups and the entrepreneurs to ensure that the ecosystem, the regulations and everything are as friendly as possible to startups, whilst ensuring that the regulations remain intact, but and this level of regulation remains as respected as possible. And each of the three regulators also run their own sandboxes. So rest assured that this will continue on, and we have full confidence that as a FinTech hub, Hong Kong will continue to grow as well. Now, we mentioned earlier about the support schemes, and I'd like to quickly come back to that. Now, in terms of the whole ecosystem, as with every other ecosystem for startups, there are four major players on four major groups within the ecosystem. There is, of course, the government and other public organizations such as ourselves, the TDC. There is, of course, the incubators and accelerators. And there is the academia, very important in terms of developing talent and R&D as well. And of course, the community itself, whether it's the startup itself or other private sector companies or facilitators. Now, the ecosystem in Hong Kong is actually very big by now. There's a lot of players, and obviously I don't have time to go through all of them in details, but I like just to highlight three of them just for your reference. Firstly, of course, is the government. Every startup ecosystem needs strong support from the government, and Hong Kong is no exception. In fact, the Hong Kong government has already invested 100 billion into information technology developments. And that investment has been going to a myriad of schemes and strategies, covering different stages, covering different sectors, covering a lot of different areas. And I won't go through all of them, but in summary, the investment and the policy so far are geared towards several main themes: increasing resources for research and development, nurturing and educating talent to deepen the talent pool here, investment funding, developing the IT infrastructure, reviewing legislations, regulations, as well as public sector procurement arrangements, and also opening public sector data where appropriate, so that the startups can utilize it, mostly in terms of more sandbox type of arrangements. The second one I want to quickly go through is the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks. Now, this is an R&D center at present with around 1,000 companies representing 23 countries and regions. Over the years, there's been more than 770 graduates from the Science Park. 80% of them are still in business, very impressive statistic there. And they have over the years applied for more than 1,000 IP properties, have received more than 220 awards. So in terms of an R&D sense, in terms of incubating startups, they've been very successful. In fact, they run 3 separate incubator programs targeting information technology, healthcare, as well as mobile technology. Now, it also bears mentioning that the Science Park runs its own corporate venture fund, the HKTDC Ventures, focusing on early stage technology startups. Currently has around 600 million assets under management, and the government has already committed that they will continue to support this venture fund where appropriate. And this fund also do not just work with the local ecosystem, they also work with industry leaders, partners from not just the Greater Bay Area, but also from outside, as well as from the investment community as well. And I'd also like to quickly highlight Startupport. It is a creative cluster in Hong Kong. It currently has around 1,650 ICT startups and entrepreneurs. And it has several strategies, and it sort of corresponds to the whole lifespan of a startup. If we start on the screen looking from the left-hand side there, Startupport works with universities, works with academia to develop the next generation talent, and of course facilitate technology R&D. It has a creative microfund for early stage investment into promising startups. And of course, it doesn't just provide funding, it also runs incubation program and acceleration program to support the startups. And there's also, of course, market development for the more mature startups in terms of marketing or commercializing their services or products. And it also has a more mature macro fund with 400 million investment size. And again, the government is also committed to continue supporting this fund as well. So we've quickly gone through the ecosystem, the partners, the support schemes there. So what are the TDC helping or what are we doing in this space? Now, just let me quickly recap on the TDC is a statutory body in Hong Kong. We are tasked with creating business connections with Hong Kong companies. I just would like to clarify that for the TDC itself, a Hong Kong company is not an indigenous company. Anyone with a business registration in Hong Kong is considered a Hong Kong company in our eyes. So for Korean startups who are either looking to work with a partner in Hong Kong or perhaps looking to have your own presence in Hong Kong, we should definitely be your first point of call. And it's not just because we're well established in Hong Kong, we also have 50 offices globally, not just in China, but around every continent. So we should be able to help with whatever your global expansion needs are. And in terms of our strategies, they take sort of three main directions. One is to create platforms for international business. By platforms, we refer to things like exhibitions or conferences. These obviously, because of COVID, they've pivoted online, but we do look forward to bring the offline events back. We also facilitate business partnership by arranging networking opportunities and also curating business matching opportunities or investment deal flow matching opportunities. And of course, we empower SMEs and entrepreneurs by providing the latest intelligence, news, and support measures where appropriate. Now, we're focusing specifically on startups. We have several strategies. One is the Hong Kong Startup Society. So it is an online platform. It has all the funding schemes and incubation support scheme listed in there. So not just the ones I've mentioned earlier, but in fact, it's a very comprehensive list, and I invite all of you to jump on that site to have a look. It also has the latest news and market intelligence surrounding the startup ecosystem there. Startup Express is our de facto acceleration program. We run it annually, and every year we would select a few sort of winners, and we will guide their journey over the next 12 months in terms of promoting, commercializing, developing markets, etc. The HKTDC Entrepreneur Day is also an annual event. So it is a collection of panel discussion, fireside chats, workshop from experienced inventors, experienced investors, ecosystem enablers, basically just to provide the latest intelligence, the latest insights and experience sharing for startups, whatever sectors or stages they're in. And just the last thing on the screen there is the HKTDC SME Center. So it is a physical center, operates a little bit like a library, and it is a centralized place where resources and references are available for startups and SMEs to access. And these will cover market intelligence, regulations, reports, research into not just the Hong Kong economy, but basically everywhere else around the world. And finally, in a lot of our platforms that we mentioned earlier, we have very specific startup elements in it. It could be opportunities for startups to showcase their solutions with all the participants. In an offline event, they may have their own booth or kiosk, or perhaps in an online event, they may have their own page, etc. It could take the form of business matching that we mentioned earlier, and these would be curated matching where we would match the services or solutions of the startup with investors who have already provided their investment interest, and we will arrange these one-to-one meetings. There could be fireside chats to talk about the latest trends and development. There could be sharing from veterans and experts on how to grow a startup, covering various topics. It could be fundraising or scaling a startup, for example, also a very important part through to market access or market regulations, etc. And of course, we will also have very sector-specific discussions where needed. They could take the form of roundtable discussion, or for example, we could run some sort of discussions with regulators where it is appropriate. Now, some of the events that we run that would have these very style-specific elements are listed on screen there. I just want to point out two of them. One at the top of the screen is the Asian Financial Forum. Despite its name, it's not focused on finance related technologies only, because we do have a very large group of financial and business leaders from around the world that take part in the forum, as well as investors, and their investment interests would be across all sectors, and very agnostic in that, and also not just sector agnostic, but also region agnostics. So we welcome Korean investors and also Korean startups, Korean entrepreneurs to consider that as not just a fundraising platform, but also a place where you can meet with potential investors, partners, customers, etc. Last but not least, at the bottom of the screen is the Asia Summit for Global Health. In fact, this is a new event that we're launching this year. As the name suggests, it will focus on the healthcare, medical care, biotech sector. It will also have a very strong deal flow investment element to it, and we invite Korean companies from that space to join us as well. So I think I will stop there. Obviously, there is a lot more to talk about, not just in terms of what's happening in the ecosystem, but also in terms of what support schemes or what sort of partners there are in the ecosystem. And of course, you know, as I mentioned, we at the TDC are also doing a lot of measures, a lot of initiatives in this particular space. So I would very much welcome all of you. If you have any questions about any of the above, to contact myself and my team here in Seoul. But for now, I think I'll stop there. Thank you for your time today.